So the lecture of today is devoted at describing the IPPC procedure, what is Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control. As I already stated, this is a very specialized flavor of the environmental impact assessment procedure that is especially devoted to evaluating the impact of industrial settlings or industrial industries or industrial plants. What is IPPC? It is a new strategy that is common to all the European Union to increase the environmental performance of industries or facilities that are subject to any authorization. The acronym stands for Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control. So we have first word integrated, that means we are integrating several objectives into the same strategy, and the objectives are that of preventing and reducing pollution and controlling the effect of industries on the environment. Control in this context concerns with pollution reduction. What are the general principles of IPPC? The general principles underlying these procedures are the first one is that of preventing pollution by using the best available techniques. An acronym you should become familiar with is BAT, best available techniques or technologies, are those technologies that may be selected as the most efficient in the prevention, control, and limitation of polluting effects. The strategic point of view is that of avoiding significant pollution events, avoid waste production, or if it is not possible, enhance recovery or disposal, so that means waste recycling, promote efficient use of energy or in general resources, maybe energy or water, organize monitoring in an integrated manner, so integrating the need for protecting the environment and the need for industrial production, prevent accidents and limit their consequences, promote and appropriate site restoration upon termination of the activity. So it is under the scope of IPPC also to produce some rules concerning the decommissioning of industrial sites or industrial plants in terms of restoring the environment to the previous conditions. The IPPC directive is the directive on 1996, number 61, the so-called IPPC directive, which establishes a common set of rules for issuing permits to industrial installation in Europe. So the directive lays down general principles governing the basic obligation of those responsible for industrial facilities, both new and existing. Please note that this IPPC directive deals also with already existing facilities. Among these, the first is to take all appropriate preventive measures to ensure a high level of environmental protection as a whole, including measures for the treatment of waste, efficient use of energy or water resources in general, prevention of accidents, and the site restoration to a satisfactory state or level following any termination of the activity, what is generally referred to as decommissioning. Into this directive also are foreseen measures to prevent pollution that should mainly involve the use of, as we said, best available techniques, but furthermore, it is provided access to information by the public, as it is always the case in all the environmental impact assessment legislations. The annexes of the IPPC directive, so Directive 96 of 61 of 1996. Annex 1 relates to industrial activities which the rule applies. So in Annex 1, there is a list of industrial typologies to which IPPC directive should be applied. Annex 2 lists the directives mentioned in Articles 18, paragraph 2 and 20. So these are all the directives that somehow are side related to the IPPC. Annex 3 lists the pollutants to be considered in setting emissions limits. Already we have indication of what we want, what kind of chemicals we want to limit, chemical spills into the environment we want to limit. Annex 4 provides some criteria for the identification of the best available technique. So in the directive itself, there is a guideline which allows policymakers to select the best available techniques. What are best available techniques? Best, most effective in achieving a high level of protection as a whole. So most efficient, available with techniques developed on a scale which allows the implementation under economically and technically viable conditions in the relevant industrial sector, taking into consideration the costs and benefits, whether or not they are used or produced in the national context, provided that the operator can have access on reasonable terms. Available means we do not pretend to eliminate totally the effect of industrial activities. Instead, the focus is preventive and is that of reducing the effects in a reasonable terms by the availability of the techniques. Techniques, both the technology used and the way of design, construction, maintenance, operation, and closure of the facilities. So it is really a technical guidelines that is applied to industrial facilities. Which are the reasons for the introduction of the IPPC? We may recognize that because industrial production processes still account for a sustainable share of the total sources of pollution in Europe, especially for pollutants like greenhouse gases, substances responsible for acid rain, volatile organic compounds, and so on, waste in general, it is very important to reduce further their negative effects on the sustainability of the facility. In this perspective, it is clear that it is more feasible to change the way of production of maybe 20 or 30,000 companies rather than to change consumption habits of hundreds of millions of European citizens. So the responsibility in this perspective is charged to manager who implement the facilities and not on the population. Instead, it are the industrials or the industrial sector that should ensure the application of viable technologies for their industrial facilities in order to protect the environment. Another important reason for establishing a common authorization rules or common authorization background in the EU is the will to avoid the so-called environmental dumping, which may encourage companies to move to those parts of the EU where environmental requirements are less restrictive. So the idea is we find a common base, all the member states in the European community agree on this common base, so that if I am a producer, an industrial producer, or a potential polluter, I'm not induced to move my production in those countries in which there are less stringent requirements in terms of environmental protection. So we shall have a common base. Um, the other important reason for introducing this common base is that the instruments chosen to harmonize the conditions and procedures for the issuance of permits are set by the directive, which contains the basic rules for issuing integrated permits. As you will see soon, the outcome of an IPPC procedure is that of obtaining the so-called Integrated Environmental Authorization, in italiano Autorizzazione Integrata Ambientale, AIE, Integrated Environmental Authorization. The European Commission has an exchange of information between experts in the various states of the EU, industries and environmental organizations to provide support for the authorities who need assistance to determine and establish which are the techniques that can be defined best available technologies. So it is not only a matter of regulating or limiting the effects of environmental dumping, but instead it is also a matter of sharing information, ensuring that all member states have access to the same quantity and quality of information concerning the techniques or the processes they employ for their production. So the work of drafting best available technologies is coordinated by the European IPPC Bureau, that has its seat in Sevilla, and it was divided in origin into approximately 30 sectors, consistent with those provided in Annex 1. I recall you. Annex 1 relates to industrial the list of activities that shall undergo IPPC. In Annex 1 of the directive, for its area, are scheduled about 2 years to complete its work and produce individual documents, that the so-called best available techniques reference documents, BAT reference documents, or BREFs. BAT reference documents are documents drafted centrally by an European bureau in Sevilla, exactly the IPPC Bureau, in which a set of informations, all the information concerning industrial processes are collected, and in particular, all the information concerning reduction or mitigation measures to environmental pollution or environmental impacts shall be collected. So the IPPC directive not only instructs the procedure for this specific sector that is in industry, but also provides a set of best available techniques. The best available techniques reference document contains general information on the sector, a description of the production process, current consumption and emission levels in the sector, the description of the techniques currently used, including an assessment of their environmental and economic performance, a choice of environmental BATs, prominent environmental best available techniques, a chapter on the emerging techniques. What is the function of these documents? The primary purpose of the BREFs documents is to assist the appropriate authorities, competent authorities. The final decision remains their sole responsibility because they must still take into consideration the technical characteristics of the facilities and of the installations, their geographical location, the local environmental conditions. So again, this is compromise. We want something that is available in economical terms, available also in social terms, but in particular available in environmental impact terms. So we do not pretend to cancel to zero all the impact, but we aim at reducing the impacts of industries. Here is a list of BREFs you may find on the IPPC website. So pulp and paper manufacturer, that is one industry that it is very impacting. iron and steel production, cement and lime production, cooling systems, chlor-alkali manufacture, FAS, fluoro, and chlor and fluoro also. There is now a directive for fluoride also. Ferrous metal processing, non-ferrous metal processing, glass manufacture, tanning of hides and skins, textile processing, monitoring system, refineries, large volume organic chemicals, smitheries and foundries, intensive livestock farming. So also some agricultural activities like farming may be seen as industrial processes, but may require an IPPC authorization. Emissions from storage of bulk or dangerous materials. Common wastewater and waste gas treatment and management systems in the chemical sector. So you have BREFs also for the chemical industries, economic and cross-media issues under IPPC, large combustion plants, large volume inorganic chemicals, slaughterhouses and animal byproducts, food, drink, and meal processes, ceramics, management of tailings and waste rock, in mining activities, surface treatment of metals. So a lot of very specific industrial sectors are listed, and for each industrial sector, BREF is proposed. Best available technology reference document is drafted by the IPPC Bureau in Sevilla. What are the principal actors that take part in the plot of IPPC? National, regional, and local authorities that are responsible for issuing permits in the EU member states. These are what we have called in the last lecture competent authority. The European Commission, and in particular Directorate D3, that is related to industry and development, from the Environment Director General, whose responsibility is to ensure the application of the directive in member states. So the European Commission is charged to verify the application of the IPPC directive by all member states. Experts from member states, National Agency for Environmental Protection, Industry, and Environmental Organization to participate in exchanges of information on best available technologies. This is the so-called IPPC panel. I recall you that we are just reviewing all we have already seen for environmental impact assessment procedure, but in this case, for a very specific type of polluter that are industrial activities. Then the European IPPC Bureau in Sevilla, Spain, as already said, is a research center that is charged of drafting and updating the BREF's documents. Then there are forums for discussion between national authorities on general issues related to the implementation of the directive, which operates through the IPPC panel and IMPEL panel. The public, as always in this sector, as Article 15 of the directive explicitly demands, should have access to application for permits, authorization, reports of monitoring, as the active participation of the public is considered essential to constrain the improvement of environmental performance. So, as always, we have the national, regional, and local authorities, the European Commission, that is the European authorities, experts from member states, and a panel of experts that discuss the technologies and the tools for production techniques. How was this directive implemented in Italy? I recall you the directive is 1996. It was implemented in Italy in 2001 by a ministerial decree. Data, format, and method of communication in Article 10, Paragraph 1 of the legislative decree of 4 August 1999. Then there is a ministerial decree in Italy in 2002, but contains some amendments to the Ministerial Decree of 2001, Ministerial Decree of January 2005, issuing guidelines for the identification and use of best available techniques for the activities listed in Annex 1, sorry, no, not Alliance, but Annex 1, the Legislative Decree of 2005, number 59, and several decrees that contain regulation and regional guidelines for the implementation of this guideline. In particular, up to date, today, all the information concerning IPPC is contained as customary in the framework law on environmental issues in Italy, that is Law 152/2006. In particular, Part 2, procedures for the strategic environmental appraisal, environmental impact assessment, and for the integrated environmental authorization. And integrated environmental authorization, this means IPPC, with which an industrial plant or part of it is allowed to operate. This is IPPC. And then in Article 34 of Part 2 of Law 152, there are relations between environmental impact assessment procedures and IPPC. As you may recall, an effort has been made in the issuing of legislations in which, given that the production of this kind of authorization is very cumbersome in terms of money, time, knowledge, flows, and so on, it is there is a trial of optimizing this procedure in order not to make the works twice. So if one plant is authorized or one facility is authorized under one of the procedures, like for example environmental impact assessment, then all the prescription accepted in one authorization are considered automatically implemented also in the other procedure. Article 34 of the Law 152 refers to works and operations subject to environmental impact assessment and simultaneously with the scope, within the scope of the law of 2005, the decree, law decree of 2005, number 59, and for substantial changes as defined in Article 5, Part 1, letter Z of such works or actions. The proposer may obtain the environmental integrated authorization and the procedure is integrated in the procedure for the issuance of integrated environmental authorization. Sorry, the environmental impact assessment procedure is integrated in the procedure for the issuance of the integrated environmental authorization. I recall you that the environmental impact assessment procedure ends up with a judgment of environmental compatibility of a plant or facility that want to be realized. In the specific case of industries, then the IPPC procedure ends up with an integrated environmental authorization, that is the equivalent of the environmental compatibility judgment issued in environmental impact assessment procedures. Let's give a look more in details on Law 59 of 2005, establishes measures to prevent and if this is not possible to reduce emissions from activities in air, water, and soil, including measures concerning waste to achieve a high level of environmental protection as a whole. Governing, it is under the Decree 59 of 2005, but proposed the issuance governing, sorry, the rules governing the issuance, renewal, and renew of the integrated environmental authorization for plants listed as I said in the beginning in Annex 1, as well as how to exercise these plants. What is again the scope? Activity listed in Annex 1 of the decree, in particular energy activities, production and processing of metals, the mining industry, waste production industry or waste treatment industry, other activities like paper mills, farms, and so on. In addition to the specified activities in Annex 1, electric power plants of more than 300 thermal megawatts are also required to undergo to an IPPC procedure. So here we have a dimensional threshold in terms of energy production levels over which the facility is required to obtain an integrated environmental authorization going through IPPC procedure. Please note that also those facilities that produce electricity powered by renewable sources are subject to IPPC. These that are new or even those that are subject to substantial modification fall within the scope of this decree. So, what are the involved subjects? I try to schematize all the complexity of the situation by this schema. In general, it is the company that starts the procedure when it's building a new plant and requires an integrated environmental authorization to whom? To the competent authority. Competent authority in Italy, according to Decree 152/2006, it is la Commissione di Valutazione Impatto Ambientale, the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission, as stated by Decree by Law 152. So the competent authority then interacting with people, so is ready to receive comments from people. Remember that all these authoritative procedures requires and allows the intervention of the population. So people may comment on the request of the company, but again, the company has the obligation to make publicity of his requirements. So while requiring the authorization, he shall made it public, and we will see later how. When the competent authority interacts with the population, environmental agency also interacts with the company and with population. Better, environmental agencies confronts and controls the activity, confronts to a company and controls the activity of a company, who is obliged to provide data on their production process to the environmental agency. Environmental agency, in their part, informs population, and in the end of all these interactions, the competent authority may emanate an integrated environmental authorization, so it is an authorization to operate this plant, and only when this authorization is emanated by the competent authority, the company is ready to put in place or to realize the facility he had in focus to realize. Okay? Competent authorities to which provide the information required by IPPC are, for the equipment subject to the National Environmental Impact Assessment, the Ministry of Environment and Protection of Natural Resources, the subsection of the ministry called Environmental Impact Assessment Service, and the National Environmental Protection Agency. For other plants not of national relevance, then the region concerned or the autonomous provinces and the National Environmental Protection Agency are the competent authorities that shall be able to emanate integrated environmental authorization. Which are the plants subject to national IPPC? Are of national responsibility facility listed in Annex 5 of Law 59/2005, or if you want, crude oil refineries, excluding industries manufacturing only lubricants from crude oil, and installation for the gasification and liquefaction of at least 500 metric tons, megagrams, if you want, per day of coal or oil shale. So you see again, here there is a size threshold that guides the competent authorities in deciding if foreseen facilities requires to undergo IPPC, power station and other combustion installation with a heat output of 300 megawatts, as already stated, is another dimensional threshold. Industries for the initial smelting of cast iron and steel, chemical plants with total annual production capacity per class of product expressed in millions of kilograms exceeding those indicated, the indicated thresholds, where these thresholds are indicated, of course, in the annex of the IPPC directive, but also in the BREFs. Facilities functionally related to a plant referred to above, related to a plant referred to above located on the same site operated by the same operator who did not carry out activities listed in Annex 1, other facilities included in the category listed in Annex 1 located entirely in the sea or on a site that extends into more regions. Okay. Let's see an application of Law 59/2005 in the case of landfills. For waste landfills to be authorized under this decree should be deemed satisfied with technical requirements if are met with technical requirements referred by Law 2003, number 36. This is the law of waste management in Italy, waste production and management in Italy. What are the contents of the application for integrated environmental authorization? In addition to the information required under the legislation for air, water, soil, and noise, the application must also describe the plant, the type and scope of its activities, raw materials, and auxiliary substances and energy used or produced by the installation, sources of emissions, status of a site of the installation before the installation, of course, the type and extent of installation into its environmental sector or environmental categories, as we have seen in the last lecture, as well as identification of significant effects of emission into the environment, the technology used and other techniques in use to prevent emissions from the plant or to reduce these emissions, measures of prevention and recovery of waste generated by the installation, measures planned to monitor emission into the environment. This is an important part into the environmental, integrated environmental authorization. There are also indications on the monitoring measures required to verify, certify that the plant is working as expected. Outline of any main alternative studied by the operator, like it is the case always in environmental impact assessment procedure, the discussion and presentation of alternatives, other measures planned to comply with the general principles. Of course, as it is in all the environmental impact assessment legislation, also for IPPC, it is foreseen a non-technical summary. The application so must also contain a non-technical summary of the data set and the identification of information that, according to the operator, should not be disclosed due to confidential industrial, commercial, or personal intellectual property protection, public security, and national defense. So, what does this sentence mean? That to the non-technical summary, then the operator is not forced to describe all the aspects of his productive process in terms of protection of property, brevetti, and infringement of brevetti, how to say, trademarks, and in case of issues related to public security or national defense, in which case not all the information it is expected to be included in the non-technical summary. But in this case, the applicant shall provide the competent authority also version of the application without confidential information for accessibility to the public. So in this case, there are two tracks that run parallel, one in which all the information concerning productive processes are presented, and these are just analyzed by the competent authorities, and a version of a non-technical summary in which not all this information particularly was protected by industrial, by property protection, intellectual property protection, may not be included. There is a very precise timetable for submission of application for integrated environmental authorization for industrial activities listed in Annex 1 of the directive. The competent authority shall determine the timetable of deadlines for submission of application for integrated environmental authorization for existing plants and for plants that already have other environmental permits at the date of entry into force of this decree. So the timetable gives also indication which are the time limits. These calendars are published in the official local organ, or for plants under state jurisdiction in the official Gazette of the Italian Republic, that is the official governmental publication in Italy. All proceedings must be conducted in fair time in order to ensure compliance with the deadline of 30 October 2007 for the implementation of prescriptions issued. And of course, as always happens, we are far away from this deadline, meaning that there are, in Italy at least, there are still some power plants that shall operate under integrated environmental authorization by the deadline of 2007, but they are still not operating. The competent authorities establish or adjust accordingly the scheduled deadline for submission of applicants for integrated environmental authorization. The procedure: the competent authority identifies the offices to which should be deposited the documents, documentation, and records relating to the procedure for public consultation, and tells the operator the date of commencement of the procedure within 30 days of receipt of the application. So the competent authority, within 30 days from the requirements of the operator, shall communicate the commencement of a procedure. The manager, within 15 days from the date of commencement of a procedure, should ensure the publication of an advertisement containing the location of a plant and the place where all the documents concerning this plant can be found, and comments submitted by the public, and the name of the operator on a provincial, regional, daily newspaper, or national in the case of projects that fall within the state jurisdictions. And then the public authority was interested but may submit in written forms to the competent authorities. The public audience may submit in written forms to the competent authorities, in this case the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission, the comments on the application within 30 days of publication. So after this publication on the public newspapers or commencement of the procedure, the public has 30 days to comment or to ask clarification. timings and addition convene a special conference of services acquired the determination of the administrations responsible for environmental permits and the comments of stakeholders. The authority shall then issue within 150 days of submission of the application by the applicant, of course, a permit containing the condition that ensure compliance with the facility, compliance of the facility to the requirements in the decree, copy thereof, and any update should be made available again to the public by publication on the national newspapers. The competent authority may request additions to the documentation presented by the operator and indicate a maximum terms of not less than 30 days for the submission of the supplementary documentation. In this case, deadlines are also, as always, customary non-environmental impact assessment procedures are suspended until the submission of the supplementary documentation. The requirements for environmental protection given by the integrated environmental authorization must be implemented within the time specified by the document and no later than October 30, 2007. I recall you that this was provided by the decree of 2005, the IPPC decree 59 of 2005. They have foreseen that before 2007, all the even all the existing facilities should have provided all the information required in order to obtain the authorization. 30 ottobre 2007. The licensing procedure, again, let's give a look. The actor, citizens, or public manager and competent authority. The manager applies for authorization to the competent authority, and the competent authority then communicate the date of commencement of a procedure. Only now, when the competent authority communicates within 15 days from the communication, from the beginning of a procedure, ask integration, communicate, sorry, in 15 days publishes the commencement of a procedure, the competent authority examines the completeness of information. If the information is incomplete, then the competent authorities request an integration in the time of 30 days. If it is complete, then it is convened a conference of services that may grant authorization within 150 days after application, and then all over this procedure, the citizens, in particular within 30 days from publication in the newspaper, all the citizens or interested subjects may comment to the competent authority asking or underlining issues that were not sufficiently made clear in the application. The integrated environmental authorization, that is the outcome of an IPPC procedure, is the provision that authorizes the operation of a facility or part of it under certain conditions which guarantee that the same complies, so the facility complies with the requirements of a decree. It replaces at all effects any other visa, clearance, opinion, or approval in environmental matters. This tells you that if your plant gets an integrated environmental authorization and your plant already had a judgment of environmental compatibility obtained after an environmental impact assessment procedure, then it will be the integrated environmental authorization that will take place and replaces the authorization, the judgment of environmental compatibility. What are the general principles considered? The competent authority in determining the condition for the release of the authorization, we consider the following general principles. We take appropriate measures to prevent pollution, in particular by applying best available techniques. There must be no significant pollution in general. Should be avoided the production of waste, otherwise the waste must be recovered, or if that is not economically or technically possible, should be disposed while avoiding or reducing any impact on the environment. Energy must be used effectively. I would say resources in general must be used effectively. It must be taken the necessary measure to prevent accidents and limit their consequences. So, in the integrated environmental authorization, there are also guidelines on how to deal with accidents during your production process. It should be spared any risk of pollution at the time of termination of the activities and the site restored under the current legislation on reclamation and environmental restoration. So also in the integrated environmental authorization, there are indications on what to do in the phase of decommissioning or termination of the activity of the facility. What are the contents of this authorization? Limit values for pollutants is Annex 3, as listed in Annex 3 of the decree. That can be emitted in significant amount according to their nature and potential for transfer from one environmental matrix to another, or one environmental component to another, for example, water, air, land, and so on, and the limit values of the noise emission under existing legislation on noise pollution. The emission limit values set in integrated permits cannot be less stringent than those established by law in the territory where the plants are located in. This has to do with the fact that in Italy we have sometimes overlapping legislative mechanism, which sometimes, or some aspect, national legislation, or better, regional legislation may overlap already what was already defined by regional legislation. The point is that the emission limit values that are included in the authorization cannot be less stringent than those required by the regional authorization, by the regional authority. So this means that regions have the right to require more stringent environmental standards, environmental impact limitation standards than the national required one. In some circumstances, may be supplemented or replaced by equivalent parameters or technical measures. Then, again, into the integrated environmental authorization, the appropriate content requirements that specify the method and frequency of measurements. As I told you, in the authorization, there are also indications on monitoring. The data collected must be reported to a competent authority for verification of compliance with permit. Typically, in this case, in Italy, are the regional environmental protection agency that verify that the plant is operating according to its integrated environmental authorization. The measures relating to condition other than normal operation are also listed or discussed into the authorization, and in particular the startup and shutdown, decommissioning, fugitive emission, malfunction, and decommissioning. The requirements for safety and prevention of major hazard communicated to the competent authority by the regional technical committee. These are all specifications that the manager of the facility may find into the authorization. Then Article 8 of the Directive 59 deals with modification to the plant. The operator shall notify the competent authority of any planned plant changes with, if it deems appropriate, updates the integrated environmental authorization or the conditions. Or if it finds that the changes proposed are substantial, it shall inform the operator within 60 days that the operator is expected to send to the competent authority a new application for the new plant for a new authorization, accompanied by a report containing an update of information. Competent authority again comments on the deadline of 150 days, 5 mesi, 5 months. In the case where changes the ownership of the plant management, the old manager and the new operator shall notify the competent authority within 30 days, even in the forms of self-certification. So if I'm selling my facility to somebody else or transferring my facility to somebody else, then I am charged of communicating to a competent authority the change of ownership of the facilities. What are the renewal of the EIA? The competent authorities renews every 10 years the integrated environmental authorization, confirming or updating them. It is an integrated environmental authorization forever? No, it lasts 10 years. Actually, now it lasts 5 years because due to subsequent changes in the legislation, now the permits, the authorization are to be reviewed every 5 years. The operator, 6 months before the expiry of the authorization, shall send a renewal application according by a report containing an update of information presented in the release of the authorization. The competent authority, as in the release phase, has 5 months time to express themselves. The review is always conducted by the competent authority when pollution caused by the installation is likely to require the review of emissions limit values set in the permit or the inclusion in it of new limit values. So this is the task of a regional environmental agency to communicate that the limits of emissions are changed, and so that it is required a renewal of the authorization. If there is if best available techniques have undergone a substantial change that allow a significant reduction in emissions without imposing excessive costs, again, this is a case in which the integrated environmental authorization should be renewed. Safety of the processes or activity requires the use of other techniques. So the information flow provided by the IPPC Bureau in Sevilla suggests that it is the case of a review of the authorization. The provision of community or national legislation indicates that the review for some specific sectors required to be undertaken. What are the obligation as expressed in Article 11? Please recall what I'm continuing to read with the law 59. Obligation article, so the IPPC law in Italy. Article 11, the operator, before implementing the provision of the integrated environmental authorization, so what it is included in the authorization, as requested, shall notify the competent authority. Subsequently, he must, so the operator must provide to the authority and the municipalities involved concerned details regarding the control of the emissions required by the integrated environmental authorization, with the methods and frequency established in the same. So the competent authority must also make available to the public the data provided by the operator and assessed through the regional and provincial environmental protection agency. The regularity of measures and mechanisms designed to prevent pollution and comply with limit values for emission. So the obligation from the side of the operator is that of notifying the competent authority before implementing the provision of the authorization. So the operator shall go to the competent authority and say, okay, I have received your authorization and I'm going to implement what you are requesting us in order to make my productive side consistent with the environmental legislation. And then from the competent authority point of view, the obligation are that also to make available to the public the data provided by the operator and assessed through the regional monitoring processes programs concerning environmental impact assessment. So it is up to the competent authority to publish or to make or to communicate to the public the results of a monitoring process. Inspections, which are responsibility of the operator of the IPPC installation, are carried out on plants under state jurisdiction by ISPRA, that is the National Agency for the Protection of the Environment in Italy. While in other cases by regional and provincial agencies for environmental protection, if the competency is of regional. What are the purpose of inspection? Verify that the operator respects in his installation the requirements of the authorization, carries out regular controls at its own expense, with particular reference to the regularity of measures and devices for prevention of and respect for emission limits values as provided by the regional and national environmental protection agency, and regularly informs the competent authority of the results of these inspections. During this inspection, regularly informs the competent authority of the results of the monitoring of emission, and without delay, in case of accidents that significantly affect the environment, communicated to the competent authority in order to require a review of the authorization. Communication and inventory of emission will deal with to Article 12 and 14. The manager of a facility in operation as described in Annex 1 shall provide the competent authority and the Ministry of Environment. I recall you that the Ministry of Environment is the president of the Environmental Impact Assessment Commissions in Italy, through the National Agency of the Protection of the Environment, ISPRA by 30 April of each year, with characteristic data relating to emissions in air, water, and soil. So, Article 12 and 14, in particular Article 12, ensures that there is a continuous flow of information between the operator and the competent authority concerning the effectiveness, the efficacy of a production process in terms of environmental protection. The competent authority every 3 years must send to the Ministry of Environment and Protection of Natural Resources through the Observatory of ISPRA or by ISPRA a communication on the application of the of the decree, and in particular the limit values for emissions applied to facilities listed in Annex 1 and the best available techniques on which these values are based. Ministry shall then send the same to the European Commission. Please note that there is bottom-up control that goes from the competent authority to the operator of the plant. It goes back to the competent authority ensuring the correct flow of information, and then it is the competent authority through the Ministry of the Environment that will go back to the European Commission in order to communicate that in order to communicate to the European Commission that its productive facilities are respecting the IPPC directive. So there is a kind of double check in which local authorities control operators and the performance of local facilities, and then these local authorities shall communicate to the European Commission also the performance and the efficacy of the methodology. This is in view of respecting the prescription, as we have said, of sharing information. So this is in the objective of sharing among all the member states information concerning industrial processes and the way member states limit the effects of industrial processes on the environment. Article 15 deals with transboundary effects. So the Ministry of Environment and Protection of Natural Resources, in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, communicates to the involved states in case of transboundary effects of some industrial facilities. Application for integrated environmental authorization must be accessible to citizens of the state that could be affected by the operation of the plant. So this is, as to say, that all the populations in Europe have the same level of, the same right of accessing to information concerning the issuing of this kind of authorization. Article 16 deals with the penalties, that are essentially penalties for the operator. So anyone carrying out activities listed in Annex 1 without being possession of the authorization, or after the same has been suspended for some reason or revoked, shall be punished by arrest. So this is penal. Unless the act constitutes a more serious offense, applies only penalty, fines. So these are a list of penalties that are provided by laws and have been implemented into the national legislation that includes IPPC procedures into the Italian legislative framework. Okay, for today we stop here. If you have any questions, otherwise we shall meet on next Tuesday and go on with another story.
Prof?
Sono qui.
Io sono Angela Sattini e ne avevo scritto qualche settimana fa per il tirocinio per la tesi.
Ah sì. Attenzione un attimo, scusi un attimo che interrompo la condivisione. Mi dia un attimo, sono subito da